So excited to be able to have you talk with us today about the talent pipeline management, and then to give us some great examples coming out of San Diego that really is just breathtaking. We had a wonderful planning session. I just wanted it to go on for another hour and a half just to listen to all of the great things that you've all got going on. So pleasure to be able to share this with everyone. And Jason, I want to just give it over to you to go ahead and take over.
Thank you, Scott. Really appreciate the opportunity to be part of today's summit. Long been a fan of the Coalition for Career Development and the great work that you all are doing. And I wanted to congratulate you on your more recent report and hosting this summit. So we're happy to play our part. And I just wanted to thank you on behalf of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So yes, today for the balance of our time, what we're going to do is I'm going to provide a short presentation on talent pipeline management to give everyone kind of a baseline understanding of what is this employer-led strategy and what does it mean for career development. So once we have that very quick baseline, I'm then going to turn it over to our panelists and facilitate a discussion with Taylor Dunne and Kevin McMackin, who I will introduce in more detail in just a little bit. But if you bear with me, we're going to spend just the first 10 to 15 minutes going over some of the basics of TPM so you understand the context of the framework and how it's been applied in innovative ways in the San Diego community. So I'm going to briefly share my screen and then we'll come back to the gallery view. Okay, and just want to confirm with Taylor that everyone can see my screen. All right, got the thumbs up. We're cooking. Okay, so this will be brief, but what I first wanted to share with you is just a little bit about our organization. So I'm with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and its foundation. The U.S. Chamber is the world's largest business federation. We represent a federation of over 1,500 state and local chambers of commerce. We have a reach of over 3 million firms. The bread and butter of our membership is small to mid-sized enterprises, which make up the largest job creators. The Chamber Foundation is our nonprofit affiliate. So it's not the membership organization. It is a philanthropic organization, a nonprofit that has a social impact mission. And I'm part of the team that runs our Center for Education and Workforce. So we're focused on all things early childhood education, K-12, post-secondary education, and everything in between. And as we are engaging in this work, how we're really oriented around the workforce space is really trying to elevate the employer leadership role in a wide variety of workforce development efforts. And I like to say that, because we are the U.S. Chamber and because of our size and reach, we really aim for scale. So the types of things we invest our time and energy into are supposed to close systemic gaps, as well as scale new capabilities and new levels of employer engagement and leadership. And how we've organized that portfolio of work is around kind of 3 core pillars that you see here. As we move to build a high quality and competitive workforce system that's tightly aligned with our economic development goals, we see kind of 3 big pillars where we need to close gaps. One is around employer partnerships, and that's going to largely be the subject of today's conversations, where we're going to preview our largest workforce initiative, talent pipeline management. But we do have work in some other spaces, including our efforts to modernize America's education and workforce data, as well as efforts to promote more public-private approaches for how we finance and invest in talent. So we have branded initiatives that fall under all of these buckets, but we're going to focus in on the partnerships one today and really tease out what this work means for those who are trying to promote career development pathways. So I wanted to start with a little bit of context around, what makes, where are we at today? And forgive me for oversimplifying this, but I think you'll get the general thrust of the points I'm trying to make. And we have some traditional approaches for how we have engaged employers in our education and workforce systems. And I just wanted to profile kind of 3 very common ways that we try to get that kind of employer leadership. And the first is advisory boards. We all have them. There's plenty of them, and employers are being asked all the time to serve on them. But often how we kind of check the box to make sure employers are there and have a voice is we convene an advisory board under one name or another. However, what I would suggest to you is that might not be, that's a tool for a specific job, but just because an employer serves on an advisory board, it does not mean that they are a customer of that program or system. And depending on who shows up, you might be getting very different answers from even the same employer. And what I've often found in our work is it's hard to tell whether or not someone's there representing that company or industry, or if they're there more out of a corporate social responsibility point of view, or there as a corporate citizen. So just varying degrees of engagement and not a ton of engagement either. Usually it's a handful of employers that have a voice in those conversations. Moving over, another way that we've tried to engage employers is more in response to certain priorities. So government and philanthropic investment. We all apply for grant programs. We want to make sure that as new grant and money is being rolled out to address whether it's STEM education or any other objective you might think of, there is usually a grant solicitation effort that takes place. And as we think about what that looks like, if you've been part of that, you know that means it's time to call up those employers and ask for a letter of support. And then maybe they'll hear from you again, maybe they won't. And if they do, guess what usually happens? Will you come and serve on our advisory board? So we start to see kind of the cyclical thing. And with the grant making, there's a huge lag time. So by the time you even roll those funds out, months, if not the better part of a year, may have already passed. Which has big implications then for the relevance and success of the program. And then last but not least, labor market information. So if we can't get them to show up at our advisory boards, let's just grab the data. That should tell us what we need to know, right? Not necessarily. And in another meeting, we could spend a whole hour unpacking labor market information, its assumptions, its methodologies, and why it's skewing the data one way or the other. But if you're using state occupational projections, that's definitely using a particular methodology that is not necessarily giving you the whole story about what demand looks like in your community or for your companies. And even if you're grabbing what is referred to as real-time data, though I would suggest it's not necessarily real-time data, you're really grabbing a lot of data that's just posted on the web. And as we all know, there's a lot of bad data out there, a lot of stale data out there. So even that, those methodologies have inherent limitations or have built-in assumptions that are going to skew the direction one way or another. So these are things that we live and breathe. I've done these for most of my career. We've engaged employers in advisory forms and fashions. We've brought them in on grant competitions, and we try to share the LMI data that's available to us. But the work that we're doing at the U.S. Chamber Foundation through our Talent Pipeline Management Initiative was really trying to reconceptualize and reimagine how we engage employers in a much more effective and streamlined way. So we came up with Talent Pipeline Management, which is a supply chain approach for how we source and develop talent. It was built by business for business to solve what we saw as a business problem, which is we are an economy that competes on talent. Therefore, we need to have tight business operations in place in order to source and develop that talent so we can be competitive. And we didn't want to just sit on an advisory board, that we're going to do that. And we didn't want to just react to LMI, the existing LMI that's out there. But instead, we wanted to come up with a whole new playbook for how employers can effectively lead and be high quality partners to the education and workforce system. It's not about just showing up and having an opinion. It's about doing work, but what work needs to be done. So we developed TPM based upon lessons learned, strategies, and tools from supply chain management because it spoke the business community's own language. It's not to suggest schools or factories or people are widgets, not at all. But when you talk to the business community about the role of an an OEM or an end customer and what a value chain is in order to create shared value and shared competitiveness, light bulbs go off. They know what that means. They do it every day. They do it inside their companies. They know what it's like when Ford supply chain competes with Toyota supply chain. They know how that operates and what's required of everyone to make that work. So now we got employers thinking differently, and we say, okay, we need to adapt some of these tools and strategies to create a talent supply chain. So we know what employers need to do to get organized, get prepared to play that end customer role, and then how they can proactively engage a value chain of education, training, and other support services in order to build that value chain that they can derive a return on investment from. So that's what TPM is all about. It's an organizing framework for how employers lead more effectively to build talent supply chains for their most critical occupations to address their most critical pain points. So that's what we built, and that's what we have been deploying. It's more than a metaphor, though. It is a collection of strategies and methodologies that, when pursued in a particular scope and sequence, make for a supply chain approach. And here you have just the 6 strategies previewed. We deliver the framework through our TPM Academy and curriculum, where we are training up and building capacity inside the business community to be able to implement this framework in a high quality way and then to do it repeatedly. And it's not rocket science, but it's about doing all of these things well and together that makes for a more holistic approach for how we unlock new levels of employer engagement and leadership. So 6 strategies that answer pretty basic questions. Of course, they get very, you can imagine the sophistication that could set in, but keeping it light, the first strategy asks employers to get focused. Where do we need to engage in collective action where we're better off working together rather than separately? What are the critical business functions and jobs? What are the pain points we want to address? What does success look like for us? It's getting employers on the same page from day one in their own setting, their own cohort or collaborative that sets TPM apart. They're not there as advisors with others. They're coming together in collective action to address a shared pain point around critical jobs. And then strategies 2, 3, and 4 are really what I like to call the do your homework phase. All those things we were hoping employers did before they showed up at that meeting and likely never did, which is now that we know what the critical jobs are and what the pain point is that we're trying to address, now let's get the facts straight on how many we need, where, and when. And that demand planning in strategy 2 is really critical because they're producing primary source data based on their business assumptions for what the level of demand looks like. And the numbers look very different than other LMI sources that you use. So it's their data, it's their skin in the game, primary source data. So I know what we need and how many we need and where. Now we need to figure out what are the requirements for filling that need. And this is where we work with employers to really reimagine the hiring requirements, make it more competency and skill based, remove things that don't need to be there, but revisit what you're asking for in the jobs, harmonize across companies where possible, but communicate how you're different when you are different. So it's creating a shared language among employers to right-size the hiring requirements and to communicate similarities and differences for their most critical jobs. And then strategy 4 is finding out where we historically gotten our talent from. We make a lot of assumptions about where we believe employers source talent from, but until they actually back map from their own HR systems, we don't actually know. So we analyze the talent flows, starting with where they historically sourced that talent from. What is their effectiveness at utilizing those sources? So yes, we might be recruiting, but are we getting 100% of the talent, 50% of the talent, 10%? Do they have the capacity in terms of seats and enrollment in order to meet projected demand based upon our business assumptions? But getting really tactical with the data to understand how their current provider networks are able to meet their need. And is it a matter of standing up more providers, or is it a matter of better sourcing from existing providers, or looking at new providers altogether? Because a lot of communities are in a state of population decline and they simply don't have the capacity to meet the need without bringing more new people in. So strategies 1, 2, 3, and 4 got us through our homework phase. We know what we need, how many we need. We know the requirements for filling the need and where we've historically gotten that need from. Now we're ready to finally get into strategy 5, which is often what we start with, which is it's time to build the talent pipeline. So now employers are armed with high quality information. They are ready to be a sophisticated partner with those preferred provider networks that they identify, so they can co-design their talent supply chain with them, and having a laser focused idea on what is the employer role and when, all across the value chain, where we get to know the learners coming in on the front end, not trying to find them on the back end. And then strategy 6 just gets into continuous improvement. Just because you built it doesn't mean it works perfect. So we want to make sure that we're using data, performance data, to always be tracking for opportunities to improve performance and enhance the return on investment for all the stakeholders to create that shared value. We also have resiliency planning for things like pandemics or other disasters that may beset your talent pipeline, where you need to fundamentally restructure it. So an end-to-end process that makes for a talent supply chain approach. And this is really focused on the employer community, because by training them up on this, this allows them to be the most effective partner possible in a wide variety of education and training partnerships, whether it's setting up an apprenticeship system, whether it's improving career and technical education, or anything in between. So that's what the TPM approach is all about. I did want to share one of our visuals that folks really like, which is our value stream map. We actually, this is part of strategy 5. When you work with your preferred providers, you could build your value stream. This is your blueprint for how you're developing talent and what the employer role is at each stage. But we allow maximum customization around these value stream maps and have implementation tools so you can co-design your pipeline with your education partners. I call it a talent supply chain. You might call it a program of study. Or a career pathway. These things go by many names, but this is how we're trying to get the employer community to really lean in on these conversations. It's by building the value stream with their preferred provider networks. Some key differences that I want to point out from TPM, because it's not just like any other employer engagement strategy. One is that it's built on our own best practices. Like I said, it was built by business for business to really help them understand their role in these systems. It's focused on the employer ROI, not exclusively on employer ROI, but it starts there. We don't try to find it later. We say, what does success look like for the business community? Let's put that on the board. We need to know if we're achieving success, because that's the only way we're going to grow the employer partnerships as well as keep them there. It's authentically employer-led, not led in their name. They're the ones driving the data production and decision-making all along. They're not just along for the ride. TPM provides a structured and agile process to facilitate collective action in the private sector, as well as decision-making across those companies. It produces granular primary source data that's actionable for you to actually build your talent supply chain. And we allow them to gauge the full spectrum of talent sourcing partners, depending on who they want to make part of their value stream. We don't lock them into any one particular network. We give them choice in terms of who they work with to develop pathways for which jobs. And again, it's employer-led, but not employer-load. So we emphasize the creation of shared value, shared competitiveness, and shared accountability. Everyone's got skin in the game in a talent supply chain. So that's what TPM is all about. To give you a sense of what it looks like in implementation, like I could go into the theoretical applications. We're going to hear from our panelists in just a second about what it looks like in their community. But just to give you a sense of how the model has worked, the Phoenix Chamber of Commerce, for example, they came in and wanted to learn the TPM system. Prior to coming with us, they were hosting breakfasts about the skills gap. They were putting reports out. They were doing good work, but the traditional kind of chamber role. We taught them the TPM system. They now operate 4 employer collaboratives involving well over 100 companies, and those companies pay dues to the chamber because of the value they create for those companies. So they went from hosting conversations to delivering talent supply chains as a service. Looking at another example at a more statewide level, the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce received training on the TPM curriculum. They then did a healthcare pilot in Louisville, had such a good experience. They've had multiple governors now invest in building a TPM infrastructure for Kentucky. And within approximately 2 years, they had stood up 30 plus employer collaboratives statewide that continue to this day, fundamentally flipping their entire state's employer engagement strategy. So just a couple examples, but now we're going to swing our attention to more of a local story involving some of our partners in the San Diego community. And I'd like to introduce to you all Taylor Dunne, who is the Talent Initiatives Manager for San Diego Economic Development Corporation. And Taylor is one of our TPM practitioners. And we also have with us Kevin McMackin, who is the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the San Diego and Imperial Counties Community Colleges Regional Consortium. And Kevin and his partners are working collaboratively with Taylor in the Economic Development Corporation to really build these talent pipelines and make them come to life. And there's all kinds of ways you can implement the TPM framework to achieve your community's goals. I can go through the theoretical applications, but we want to hear how this community took some of these practices and made it work for them to actually achieve success defined by them. So welcome, Taylor and Kevin. Thank you for permitting me to provide that TPM 101 for our crowd, but I have prepared a few questions for us today to get started. And then I'll try to keep an eye on the clock so we reserve a little bit of time at the end for audience Q&A. And I encourage anybody who has commentary or questions about the opening presentation or the discussion that you've just heard or that you're about to hear, to please put it in the chat. Engage with your peers, be an active participant. We're going to be busy talking, but we have Scott and others monitoring the chat and who are going to flag potential questions to bring up later today. So get in there, speak early and often. We want to make sure you're part of this conversation. We're going to invite you in just a little bit. But if you're ready, Taylor and Kevin, I think we can get started. So the first question I wanted to ask both of you was more about setting the context. Number one, any additional background this audience should know about you and your organizations, but then also, what was going on in your community? What were the challenges that were in front of you that were top of mind, and why TPM? What about the framework spoke to you? And where did you see this as a useful tool or framework to address some of these community challenges? So maybe we'll start with you, Taylor, and then we'll hear from Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having us here today, Jason. The TPM framework has really served us well in San Diego. And I think the first thing I'd like to mention, I think we might talk about this more later, but this collaborative is actually made up of 5 members in total. So Kevin and I represent 2 of 5 organizations that work with us on this. The other 3 are our Workforce Investment Board, San Diego Workforce Partnership, the City of San Diego, which is kind of a unique partnership here, even though we represent the county as a whole, and then United Way of San Diego, who actually serves as an evaluator for our programming. So they've all played really pivotal roles in this, and I want to shout out to them. Just to set the scene as far as the economic makeup of San Diego and what made us think that this was going to be necessary. San Diego County has a really thriving, what we refer to as innovation economy, which means that most of the companies that have really good jobs, really high wage, high quality jobs here are tech and life sciences companies. They create an economy here in San Diego that's super resilient, lots of great jobs. Unfortunately, a lot of those jobs, most of those jobs, are filled by folks that don't really represent the actual demographic makeup of San Diego. So what we can kind of assume from that is that a lot of these companies are bringing the talent in from elsewhere, which poses a couple of different challenges. The first being that the cost of living in San Diego is increasing exponentially. So that option is becoming less and less likely here in San Diego. We hear from employers constantly that they're having a hard time convincing people to move here. It's beautiful and all, but it is very expensive to live in this county. The other problem that it causes is that the people who were born and raised in San Diego don't have an opportunity. Something's missing. They don't have access to those really good, really high quality jobs. And we see that in the demographic makeup. When we look at the demographic makeup of that workforce of the innovation economy, it doesn't match the demographic makeup of our population here in San Diego. We're majority Hispanic and Black population, and that's not who's represented in the innovation economy. So we knew that this was an issue that we needed to address. We needed to find better talent pipeline strategies here in San Diego. We needed to diversify and make sure we had a quality workforce that was ready for the jobs here. I think that the thing that really drove us toward using the talent pipeline management framework is that, first of all, as an economic development organization, everything that we do is employer-led and data-driven. So the fact that that's the basis of this strategy is really what incentivized us to take a look at it and see how we could really make it apply to the work that we were doing here in San Diego. And I think we'll talk more about how that applied, but I'll turn it over to Kevin, see if he has anything else to add.
Thank you, Taylor. I think that Taylor did a wonderful job just summing up what all of us are experiencing, no matter the partner that she listed as a part of this this collaborative. I think from a community college standpoint, one of the things that we've always wanted is to partner more closely with industry, to partner with our community partners and so forth. And TPM really provided an opportunity to do that. I think that we would come together and we would talk and we would agree to participate on a grant, and we'd give our letter to the other organization who was leading the grant, and we'd talk about it and have a few meetings, and then everybody would kind of go off on their own and continue working the way they were before. And really this process, this program, TPM, has provided a vehicle to help us see the benefits of collaborating and really working together to accomplish our economic growth goals in San Diego. And so now we talk regularly. It's not just about finding the next grant and moving on. And it's really about how we work together to understand what industry needs and prepare students ultimately to fill those needs. And so it really has become a collaborative process.
Yeah, Kevin, I like that point you made. And one of my cliche TPM statements I like to make, I'm full of them, is you need a system, not a program. And we have a lot of programs and they live and die, but systems are sustainable. And I think you picked up on a really good point that we need to have a system in place if we're going to consistently and reliably engage employers to address these larger community and economic development goals. And on that point, I wanted to swing back to both of you. To really drill in on the equity question, because as Scott pointed out in the chat, that's a prominent topic here, and it's something everyone's talking about: how to promote a more equitable talent marketplace. But another one of my cliche statements I say is hope is not a strategy, but TPM is. And I was wondering if you could both wax poetic a little bit about how what you're doing in your community is leveraging these tools and methodologies to not just talk about what it would mean to have a more equitable talent marketplace, but how you're operationalizing that as a system. So I was hoping you could just elaborate on the equity goals and how you're intentionally using the framework to help achieve them. And sorry, one more thing, Taylor, you'd mentioned the innovation industries, but I was wondering if you might be able to go a little bit deeper as well, or you, Kevin, on where you're trying, which industries and occupations you're really targeting to achieve those goals.
Yeah, definitely. So just to start by answering that question, at the beginning, when we were kind of laying out the first 3 years of this and what we were going to look at, we landed on 6 industries that we wanted to cover. They were software engineering, general engineering, general business functions like operations and marketing, manufacturing, healthcare, and life sciences. So we ended up drilling down into 1 or 2 occupations within each of those industries that really do represent the industry, and ended up actually tweaking some of the occupations we focused on to ensure we were reaching and serving the diverse population and creating these pathways in an effective way, getting creative about how we're working with industry and how industry sees their own jobs as a means of getting more folks into the pipeline early. So one way we use TPM to do that is really during these employer working groups, as Jason was mentioning before, we have a combination of quantitative and qualitative data that we're collecting, right? So we're getting the hard numbers from the employers, but we're also having conversations with them. And through those conversations, when we talk about skill requirements, when we talk about what's really needed to perform in an occupation at the entry level, we're able to kind of put pressure on employers to tell us whether or not some of these requirements that they have on these entry-level jobs are necessary, and encourage them to, do some reflection on their own hiring requirements. Do you need a bachelor's degree for this? Do you need XYZ, years of experience for this entry-level job? Or do you just need to know how to operate this, this software program and have some, employability skills, and then the rest kind of comes with employment, right? And by removing those hard requirements or those blanket requirements that tend to exist in a lot of these, what we refer to as like high skill industries, you're inevitably removing a barrier to entry, right? You're inevitably saying, okay, if you don't have to have a very expensive piece of paper as the, hard line entry level requirement for this job, we're opening it up to a much bigger talent pool, which is better for the employer. And it's for sure going to open it up to a more equitable opportunity to achieve these, to be placed in these occupations. Kevin, did I miss anything?
No, I think that was great. One of the other ways that this really benefited, I would say, the training providers, so the community colleges, the universities, and so forth, is it really also gave us an opportunity to look inward and really look at the demographics of our student population. So, if we were looking at software development, for example, and we were noticing that the makeup within, I do this because Taylor's charts normally have a circle that show our populations, right? But if we were looking at the makeup of industry, for example, around software development, if we were to then take a look at our student population, does it align? And are we really providing and exposing our students to occupations that would help lead them in this direction, lead them to a wonderful occupation that pays a living wage? And so it really provided us with that opportunity also. And so part of the application process to become a preferred provider, which I'm sure we'll touch on in a little bit, but part of the application process actually forced the training providers to take a look at some of that information. And as I'm sure many of the people listening today know, that's not always a comfortable thing to do. We always talk and promote diversity, and we really try to emphasize diversity, but when it comes down to it, when you look at your programs, that's not always the case. And so then it allowed us to say, okay, well, what do we need to change to ensure that we're getting a real representation of our community within our program as well? Ultimately, all of those things together will impact the makeup of San Diego and help our workforce. That diversity is essential to our success as a community.
Great. And Kevin, yeah, I definitely want to come back to the preferred provider designation, but maybe we start with something that preceded that. which is improved labor market information. If you
Yes.
were tracking the framework as I was going through it, one of the earlier strategy 2 is around demand planning, getting the facts straight on what the actual level of demand is for those critical occupations, and getting a sense of the time horizon associated with that demand. But Taylor, maybe you could elaborate a little bit on how you all approach demand planning, and what insights did that drive? What aha moments or light bulbs went off or didn't go off? Did it confirm what you already suspected or knew? Which I would like to get a sense of what your experience was with doing the demand planning process. And Kevin, would love to get your reaction in terms of how your institutions then reacted to that data. What did you learn from them? Did it lead to any aha moments or change in priorities or decision making? But Taylor, let's have you start, and then Kevin come back clean up.
Sure. So the way that we have it structured, and I think this is how a lot of TPM practitioners do it, is we have a working group that could be made up of anywhere from 7 companies to 10 to 15 companies. And we go through a series of surveys and, like I said, surveys and meetings to understand what jobs are critical, what the high demand jobs are, and difficult to fill jobs. So maybe that it's not the one that you're going to have the most people in it, but it's in the highest need of a better talent pipeline. So that's really where we want to focus. And that in itself reveals a lot for us, I think. And then looking at the skills needed, we get a conversation going between companies within the same industry, but also between multiple people within the same company. So we find that there's an interesting relationship and dynamic between, say, a chief HR representative, or just an HR business partner, and an actual hiring manager who's doing the job day to day and going to be who this new hire reports to. What happens when we get them talking about the skills needed is that we found that a hiring manager might write down a list of skills, and the HR representative is just going off of that list of skills. And programming languages is a really good example. So if one person, let's say the hiring manager says, we use Python, so we need everyone who's coming in to know the programming language Python. The HR representative just takes that on its word, right? But when you get them talking, what you find is like, well, if they know Java, which is pretty close to Python, that will work too. So now our understanding of the skills needed for the occupation really opens up. And again, that opens up the talent pool for the employer. This is all beneficial to the employer. So then we're able to publish that information. We call them talent demand reports, and we publish them on our website. It's a web-based report, and it outlines everything that we learned from these employer working groups, including nuances like not necessarily need this programming language, you just need a programming language, right? And those talent demand reports become available to anyone in the region, any kind of institution in the region that's training potential workers. So that could be a coding boot camp, that could be a prestigious four-year university, it could be a community college. I think this addresses that equity issue because, big well-known universities have advisory boards of all the, really well-known companies in the region. But with this talent demand report, all of those well-known companies in the region are providing the feedback that anyone can hear, anyone can learn what it is they're looking for. So that kind of levels the playing field when it comes to the labor market data. And then of course, it's coming straight from the employers themselves. These are the jobs they need, those ones that are here in San Diego. These are the skills those workers need. And so it really regionalizes it, localizes the information. Like you were saying earlier, Jason, it takes a lot of assumptions out of it. And then it gets the employer side of things talking and working things out more too.
So Kevin, you had all this frenetic activity happening amongst the employers are producing all this new information. Now they're coming to their education partners. How are you reacting to this? What was that experience like?
So extreme gratitude, I think, would be the first thing I would say. So I have to say, and I'd hate myself if I didn't, we have a fantastic research arm tied to our community colleges, our Center of Excellence. And in San Diego, they're amazing. They put together amazing labor market reports and so forth. But we've found quite a bit of difficulty getting faculty in colleges to buy into their reports. And so often what we were seeing through the talent demand process is we were getting similar ideas and similar things, but with more detail. And that narrative that Taylor described really added so much more to what we were doing. And so once we had that, because it was coming straight from industry, because it was coming from a trusted resource like the San Diego Regional Economic Development Corporation, it gave us a little bit of leverage. It allowed them to, I guess, trust a little bit quicker. So it made our jobs a little bit easier. We've always wanted to align to industry. I mean, that's our ultimate goal. Like when we think about what we do, like we prepare students for jobs, for work. We want them to be employed. And so we've always wanted to ensure that we're preparing students in a way that will ultimately lead them to that. But we have just different barriers in education that we have to deal with. And so receiving this information directly from industry, I think, was one of the most beneficial things. I have to say, Jason, my feelings were a little bit hurt because I wanted to be a part of those meetings. I wanted to sit in on those discussions. But I understand why I wasn't a part of those convenings, because this opportunity allowed industry to say and express the things that they were experiencing. And so the information that we receive is extremely valuable, because it also helps to open our eyes sometimes that, you know, sometimes we're difficult to work with, and sometimes we do need to change. And so that part has really been amazing. And we've been able locally to tie some of our community college investments directly to the curriculum alignment and the projects that are coming to us through Advancing San Diego and TPM.
Yeah, Kevin, we hear that refrain often where, you know, folks think it's heresy. If we don't get everyone at the same table all at once every time, then it's not a good meeting. And what we learned is it's not a matter of if you'll engage, it's when. And
Exactly.
the timing is important, because for my community, what we need is a space to get together and do our homework. And I like to call those first few TPM engagement sessions to be group therapy, because there's a lot that needs to get out on the table. A lot of frustration needs to be vocalized. People need to be honest with one another, and they will be. But the problem is when you put all the other community stakeholders around those first couple convenings, they go quiet. And you're not
You don't want to ruin relationships, right?
There you go. There you go. So, but hopefully you'll see that the output is when they do come, they're better prepared and they're ready to give you everything you need for a successful partnership. But there's an important step, Kevin, that you had brought up that I want to make sure as part of this discussion, which is preferred provider designation. Again, TPM is a framework. You could use it and abuse it however you like. So that's what we call it, but how you operationalize that in the community is up to you. You may know who those providers are heading into it. You may pick them later. You might do a formal RFP process, but this whole idea is be intentional about signaling and partners of who you're going to partner with and source from. Just to give you an anecdotal example, up in Michigan, we worked with a large utility provider that was posting 100 skilled trade jobs and getting over 4,000 job applicants, fewer than 50 of which were qualified, and retaining virtually none. They used the TPM framework, identified 4 preferred providers, which were community colleges. They posted 100 skilled trade jobs. They got 100 highly qualified job applicants, 98% retention a year later, saved $30,000 per hire. Made good business sense. But Taylor and Kevin, I wanted you to elaborate on this story. So Taylor, it's my understanding that you all did make use of a preferred provider designation process. Would like to get a sense of your, how you all made decisions around that. But then Kevin, would love to get from the educator's perspective how you all reacted to that process and to get your perspective on it. But Taylor, let's start with you.
Yeah, so again, everything here is employer-led. So we take those talent demand reports, we take the information that we learned from these employer working group meetings, and we created an application and did it as kind of like an open sourcing type of opportunity. Any training provider in the entire region could apply for this designation as a preferred provider. And we can talk about the nuances of that and just be upfront about the difficulties that come with this, right? These relationships and the why do we need this kind of designation, or this takes too long, or whatever. And I trust Kevin to get into that, and I give him the okay to air our grievances with the process. But we had employers review those applications. So once again, it's on the employers to make these decisions and say, yes, what they're teaching here teaches to the skills needed. They have enough hands-on experience to be prepared for an internship or for an entry-level job. And another piece of that is that diversity piece Kevin mentioned earlier, when we asked the training program to share their curriculum, we also ask them how they engage with K through 12, what their history of employer engagement is, and what the demographic makeup of their students is. What are you doing to reach and serve a diverse student population? Because that's the end goal here, right? Like, how are you serving San Diegans? And so that's a long process that we go through, and that the providers go through, and that the employers go through in reviewing those applications and sharing their feedback. But ultimately, it's proven to be beneficial. So as part of the program, we run an internship, which is kind of the bait for the providers, for the talent providers to get involved in the first place, because only the students of those talent providers are qualified for these paid internships. But since then, it's kind of gained its own, reputation as being a badge of honor to be a preferred provider and to be included in this network. And beyond the internships, when I, as a talent initiatives manager at an economic development organization, and met with the company that's looking for talent, this is my short list. Like, these providers that have been designated by employers are who I go to first and say, they have great software developers, they have great machinists. Like, this is where you should go. This is where you should look first. Kevin, you go ahead and share all the flaws of the system. I know there are some still. We're working on it.
So before I get into the flaws, I will say, so I do a fair amount of employer engagement as well, in addition to the collaboration that we do. And it's really been interesting to see how, when we engage with employers and they're talking about like piloting an internship program, for example, they often want to start with our preferred providers. Because they've put a fair amount of trust into that process as well. And so it really is become a way for us to use that also as motivation for other programs to continue and go through the process to become preferred providers. So I think I would say that much of the process, or the challenges that the community colleges experienced, weren't necessarily a part of TPM, but more so, I think, tied to the grant funding and the timelines associated with it. So, one of the challenges that definitely was not easy was it was a very fast process and fast turnaround. So we often would have a talent demand report shared with the colleges, say for software development, and then they would have a very short turnaround time, sometimes just a couple of weeks, to put together their application. And that application, as Taylor described, was really outlining where they taught within their curriculum those core competencies outlined by industry. And so when you have programs who maybe they're one or two competencies away from being a preferred provider, it's kind of a hard pill to swallow, I guess you could say, because they feel like, hey, I can make those changes and I will make those changes, so why can't I become a preferred provider now? And so that's one of the things that we've worked through. As I mentioned before, we use some of our local funding to support in that process. I think one of the other things is, not all of our colleges, not all of our training providers are created equally. And so some of our colleges were far more prepared to respond. So we have two community colleges in San Diego where I believe they applied for every round and were selected as preferred providers for every round. And then we have some colleges who they really didn't have the staffing or the manpower to go through the application process or the time to do it. And so we found that we had to provide much more technical assistance and handholding to really encourage and bring them along in the process. And full disclosure, we're still trying to figure that part out. Even when we have a college where, they may have the best manufacturing program in San Diego, convincing them to go through the process is more work than actually doing it, than actually completing the application. And so I think that we're not in education always prepared to respond at the same time frame that industry needs us to. And that's definitely something that we're working on, and we're trying to improve our ability to respond to industry needs. But I think it was difficult at times because this process definitely highlighted that for us.
Exactly. So really great feedback. I'm learning a lot just about how you all are operationalizing these methodologies on the ground. You're right. There's trade-offs to these decisions, but what the framework tries to provide you is a structured way of thinking through how you're going to make those decisions and the consequences of them. But absolutely. Yeah, One of the things we've noticed some other TPM collaboratives have done is create a provisional designation to say, it might not be the full provider designation, but we will give you a provisional designation to get to know you and to try things out while you are closing some of those gaps. So there's kind of a way of phasing in, so it's not all or nothing. But you're right, we help you think through those decisions, and it's just really great, Kevin, to get that feedback from the educator side about what's working and where there are potential points of friction. But what a brave new world when it's not just the education partner reaching out to engage the employer, but now the employer is reaching out to engage you. Hopefully it makes things a little bit easier.
It definitely does.
Great. So you did bring up, or something that came up was the internship piece that Taylor brought up. So given work-based learning is a big theme of this summit, I was hoping with the remaining time we have for the facilitated dialogue, we could at least dive into that a little bit. So my question to you all is, using the TPM framework, did it help you get better organized, improve the quality of the work-based learning offering, and scale? For me, one of the biggest challenges I have with traditional work-based learning is it's not very scalable. But by using the TPM framework, did it allow for standardization and scalability around those work-based learning offerings? Or what could you tell us about how this framework impacted your approach to work-based learning and what some of the outcomes were? But maybe Taylor, we'll start with you and then we'll pitch it to Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. So worth mentioning, the way we structured it is that for each industry we covered, there would be one round of internships, and they were all considered internships, right? So it's a 240 hours. Students are paid between $19 and $22, depending on the industry standard. And there's access to wraparound services. And so we were, because of the TPM process, able to really hone in on one occupation that the students were going to do at the company. So for example, during our software round, we had focused on the skills needed for an entry-level software developer, software engineer, computer scientist, essentially. And so that's what the internship was in. And so we had a system where we could kind of verify that we provided these internships to small companies, because they make up a large portion of the firms in San Diego, and actually more than or a majority of employ a majority of the workforce. So small businesses are really important to our work here. So that the internships were only available to small businesses, and we were able to have a controlled environment in that way, where we made sure the students were being paid, we made sure it was a quality experience, etc. What we did learn is that internships, that model of work-based learning, isn't good for every industry. So it works really well for software. Students going through software development training programs understand that having an internship is going to be an important part of their education experience, and that it's going to help them get an entry-level job, and that's part of their journey, right? But when we got to manufacturing, the demographic that we were serving in the manufacturing training programs, and what a manufacturing job looks like, wasn't as suitable for an internship program. So we kind of clunked through that one and had to figure it out as we go. But first of all, there's such high demand for people in manufacturing in San Diego that a lot of these students already had full-time jobs. Like, they did not need an internship. Really what we needed was to get more students interested in manufacturing. So kind of exposure to the industry a lot earlier on. The other thing we were dealing with the manufacturing industry was that a lot of those students needed a consistent source of income. So they were not willing to give up their job, even if it wasn't related to the industry they were pursuing, for a temporary internship. So in going through this process and understanding the needs of employers and understanding what's available in the talent sourcing side of it, we've learned how to shape these opportunities to meet the needs of the populations that we're serving, or the industries that we're serving. So I think that was one of the biggest wins that's come out of this, is understanding work-based learning better by industry.
Kevin?
And so I actually chair a work group for all of the community colleges in San Diego around work-based learning. And so I think when we initially started this project, that internship component was one of the things that excited me most about this. But when we really take a look or dig deeper into work-based learning, we all understand that an internship is just one type of work-based learning. There's so many opportunities along the continuum. And so what we what we've talked about now for like future stages, and as we progress our work, is how do we open up our process to expose students to other forms of work-based learning that are essential in their development. So, how do we work with the employers through our talent working groups to maybe provide additional opportunities early on in a student's program to keep them excited about the industry and about the occupation and so forth. So, for example, Taylor and her team, they wanted to do something special for the community college students and so forth. And so they were talking about putting together some type of an event. And so with just a few minor tweaks, we actually converted that into a full series of mock interviews with participants from the talent working groups, and also board members from the EDC, businesses from the community. And really what we were doing with that is helping to just expose them to work-based learning. Over and over and over again, we hear overwhelmingly from employers that they need students with more experience. And work-based learning is the best way that we can provide students with those experiences. And so I think through this process, prioritizing the internships and then hopefully in the future other opportunities, we really will be able to meet that need that employers have over and over again expressed to us. I think the flexibility in adjusting our form of work-based learning too will help in future groups as we reevaluate the manufacturing experience. For example, is maybe it's not a paid internship, but there are definitely other forms of work-based learning, like capstone projects that are guided by industry and evaluated and presented to industry at the end of their program. How do we build in those types of experiences? We also find internships, like Taylor highlighted, they aren't always the most equitable experiences. So, for a student who, they still have family support, or they're not as worried about feeding their own family, it's much easier for them to take that internship that pays $22 an hour and leave their job, right? But for a student who is providing for dependents, working multiple part-time jobs or even a full-time job, it's a hard sell at times. And so we find that embedding the work-based learning into the curriculum is the most equitable process. And so moving forward, I think we're trying to evaluate how we can do that as well. But overall, the work-based learning component from a training perspective was one of the most important factors for us.
It's a powerful incentive. Go ahead.
Kevin mentioned those mock interview opportunities. That was a result of the feedback we've gotten from employers about the importance of soft skills in these training programs, and realizing that we don't know, a training provider might not know what their students' soft skills are until they go through a mock interview and get feedback from the person that conducted that interview and said, actually, you really need to work on your communication, or you really need to work on, presenting yourself better, or something like that. All things that the employers shared with us during those working group meetings as being really important in the skills that they're looking for these entry-level positions.
Yeah, I like to think in TPM, we take internships and other work-based learning experiences as these kind of isolated experiences, and now make them a real tactical part of the talent pipeline. So this experience at this point in the pipeline to address these needs or to communicate this level of performance. And it really does become like a performance assessment. It's not just an experience, but it's being used to vet that individuals have the competencies and skills needed to perform that business function. So really great. Well, we are going to need to be moving into the audience Q&A. And I know this session was scheduled till 4:15 Eastern, but I think we have a few extra minutes if your schedules permit to hang on there before the next speaker joins us. But I did want to ask you 2 rapid fire questions, so short responses, while the audience gathers their commentary and questions. The first of which is, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself at the start of this process? Or if it's easier, what advice would you give our audience if they're just getting started with a framework like TPM?
Kevin, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go?
Sure, I'll go first. We'll break our tradition here. I would say invest in the initial partnership development. What I found is TPM provided us, like I said, the vehicle. And so what we've been able to do is use this in so many other areas where we collaborate now. And so really invest in that partnership development and use the TPM process to really guide and pull your community stakeholders together.
I'd say if you're an employer and you're interested in a journey like this, go back to that skills-based hiring mindset.
Yes.
Think about what the skills really are needed in order to fill these entry-level positions, because that's how you're going to really open up your talent pool. If you're a practitioner, I would say be patient and trust the process, because there have definitely been points where we're like, what is happening? Why is nobody listening to us? And then it kind of all of a sudden comes together in different ways. And all of a sudden there's this big crisis of talent and nobody can find any talent. And this is what they're looking at. This is where they're the program that they're coming to and the practices that they're implementing in order to fix that. So be patient.
Great. And then my final rapid fire question, because we do have a VIP coming up after this panel. If you had any advice or counsel you would give the Secretary of Labor, what might it be? Or feel free to pass if you don't have any. But Kevin, we'll start with you again.
So I think we have a long list here, but we'll be as fast as we can. So Taylor mentioned it, skills-based hiring, really an emphasis on skills-based hiring. I think all of us for a very long time, and trust me, I have degrees. I'm not trying to devalue the importance of a degree, but if we could start focusing more on those skills, the skill-based hiring, I think that it will open up a lot of opportunities for some of our underserved populations, and also remove some of those barriers that employers are experiencing with finding talent right now. I'll add one more if it's okay. We see a ton of funding opportunities coming towards colleges and workforce right now. And it's fantastic. We're grateful, but a lot of them also place barriers or challenges when it comes to funding things like work-based learning. So we will get really excited about a grant that's coming out, and then when you read in it, it won't allow us to say pay a student's wage for work-based learning. Or for an internship. And so that just presents some challenges in supporting students and connecting them to employers through this process.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. How about you, Taylor?
I think those are exactly what I would say too. Again, that skills-based hiring, and just from the top level, encouraging employers to explore these kinds of concepts and these ideas of going back to the basics, going back to, talent pipeline management, assessing the skills needed. And then, funding opportunities that are flexible enough to meet the needs of the region they're intended to serve, or of the population they're intended to serve, because such a big country, even statewide, even regionally, we have such varying populations, such varying challenges. So those funding opportunities, having a lot of flexibility always is helpful for continuing this work.
Great. Two terrific recommendations. Hopefully those will get passed on. And I like to often point out that, saying something like employers should do skills-based hiring is just rhetoric until you operationalize it. And that requires change management. That's more than just words or flipping a switch. You need to actually build capacity and new business processes in order to do it and do it well and always get better at it. So hopefully TPM provides at least one framework out there for how employers can lean in on the skills-based hiring conversation. And then flexibility couldn't say enough about that. Local communities should be empowered to make those decisions and set those priorities. So anything we could do to really empower those communities to own that decision making and be accountable for it, all the better. They know their communities better than anyone and what the needs are. So I wanted to thank Taylor and Kevin and ask to hold on for about 10 more minutes of their time to see if we might be able to engage some of the audience's commentary. And I'll look to Scott and the team to maybe call out where there are some priority questions for us to address with the balance of our time.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Wow, amazing panel. One of the things that I'm excited about, as a professor who's trying to work with systems, it feels to me it's always about language and it's about culture. It's like, what's the world view of the organizations we're working with? And what I love about the system of TPM and listening to you all talk is it's helping us understand, how do we communicate with the business community? How do we think in the terms of what they're perceiving? What's so exciting is we all have the same end in mind. And you started this, Taylor, by saying, here we've got this population right here in our community that we need to start figuring out a way to support them in their development. That's the equity gap that we've all been talking about, right? And that's the same problem we have. The language of the talent pipeline management, we can see the connection, especially when you show that beautiful graphic. It's one of my favorites that you've always had, Jason, because we can see where the business can start leaning right into the elementary and the secondary all the way through the higher ed. So this is the kind of conversations that I think really help I'm going to let Brian, I'm going to want you to jump in here too, because you've been in this space for a while, but I thought we could frame it around Jenny Lamer's question, which is like, who becomes the moderator? Like, who's the helper in the between all of this, right? To help translate for the different organizations that are involved so they can all get on the same page. Are you working with human resources? You know, you've got all these different groups, you got programmers, all this. It's got to be an interesting piece. So what have you all learned in your experience of who can put this kind of cultural communication together?
Yeah, so thanks a lot. Appreciate that, Scott. And you know, when I think about all that we've heard today and yesterday, it's amazing how this all comes together around this knowledge-based communication network that you're talking about. And we're familiar in Wisconsin with the TPM model. It's working through our regional workforce board and our chamber. And I think it's a matter of all of us accepting to the opportunity to carry the mantle and engage in that dialogue. It may be happening, or components of it may be happening in your home community already, it's just not fully known. So ask the questions, get involved, be an advocate for this type of work, and where we can, bring new thoughts and ideas to the table. I was really encouraged with Jason, Kevin, and Taylor's conversations about the impact that new ideas and strategies like this, systems, I should say, can have on an organization. So I'll just, in reference to that, there's many different ways to do it depending on the community. And as you mentioned, Scott, the culture. For example, at our college, we help facilitate a consortium of work-based learning programs for our area high schools. They're too small to independently do it by themselves. So we've championed that on their behalf, which is one way to do it, right? Larger school districts, and we have those in our area too, they've accepted that and they've hired their own work-based learning coordinators. So it depends a little bit on where you are and what situation your communities are in. But it will always take an industry champion. You need the voice. We heard it from Nick Pinchuk yesterday. Someone has to amplify the message and create the sense of urgency in order to move institutions forward. And in our region, it is the industry voice that is driving that. So I give great credit to our chambers and to our workforce development boards, because that's kind of the catalyst to get the rest of us moving in the right direction. But it starts with one person. So we've learned a lot in the last 2 days. We can each carry that torch to a new level. I think one thing that I'll ask our panelists here just to comment quickly on, and I'll kind of monitor the time here as well, is that when you think about work-based learning, we often think of it as sort of the entry point into the occupation. But so many adults are transitioning from one occupation to a new occupation. Maybe it's a result of COVID or a dislocated economy where they live is changing. How can we leverage this concept of work experience on a broader level for any individual, whether it's a youth just getting started making their first job, or if it's an adult that's worked for 15 years and now has been dislocated and needs to reskill? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that skill transferability charts are really interesting. So even if you are transferring industries, maybe you already have some kind of work-based learning experience from your prior experience. And it's just finding a way to identify that and promote it on your, whether it's your resume or your interview or in your conversations with career counselors. There are a lot of skills that transfer from, maybe working from a grocery store into being an IT help desk person. Like, there's a lot of skill transferability there. And so being able to break that down both on the employer side of saying, again, what are the skills really needed, and then tracing them back to how that relates to other occupations, I think can be really helpful there.
Yeah, reminds me, Taylor, in the community and technical college world, and I would imagine at the university level too, credit for prior learning is really valuable. We can help shorten that runway for individuals to get into that new career based on the experiences that they're bringing from their past work experience. Kevin, what are some of your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. So you took the words out of my mouth. The credit for prior learning is just so important and something that we're really trying to prioritize. But it's beyond that, it's also helping to inform and teach our students how to really talk about those previous experiences. So we find that sometimes we can put a student through the most intensive, awesome internship possible, but if they can't tell an employer what they experienced in that internship, then why did they do it? And so really just making it a focus of making them career ready and having those discussions early on is very important. But just to that fact, our population of the community colleges in San Diego is quite interesting. over half of our students are over the age of 24. And so it's actually more of the norm that our students come with experience. And so really working with faculty, working with our career centers to help teach and help students understand how to use those skills that they've accumulated elsewhere to their benefit.
That's so important. I'm going to just switch the question a little bit, Jason, because I'm really intrigued with maybe your thoughts from your perspective. Typically, and not on all cases, but typically students are getting their experience-based learning from their teachers. And oftentimes in education, it's a pretty straight pipeline of development. You're going to high school, you're going on to the university, you're taking a teacher's pathway and you become a teacher, right? Maybe you do a little bit of external work on the side, but for the most part, unless you're in an occupational specific program which requires a licensure, it's unlikely that you have a lot of outside work-based learning experience yourself. So it's hard to transfer that excitement, that knowledge base. What are your thoughts, and maybe what are the chambers? What could they do to help get teachers more involved in experiential learning outside of the classroom?
Yeah, for sure. It certainly can be part of it. I mean, once you start investing in these relationships with these providers, you can have a lot of conversations around how to improve upon it. And one of those could be, hey, look, we're now getting really clear on what's being taught in the institution and how it aligns with the hiring requirements. We're getting really solid on building capacity and improving the quality of work-based learning offerings. But one of the targets we might have is, how do we make sure that the educators who are working directly with these students have greater experience and exposure in the opportunities they're preparing students for? And they could build that into discussion. But now it's not just, again, an isolated moment of a teacher externship. It's saying we need to build the knowledge base and experience base of this cadre of educators who are part of our talent supply chain on which we rely to build this pipeline. So we're going to invest in them so they are always better prepared to incorporate our needs into that classroom experience. So I think it just provides the right environment to make the ask. If that's where the need is, to say we need our educators to get more experience. If it's part of the talent supply chain that I'm deriving a return on investment from, this makes good business sense now. This isn't just doing it because it's the right thing to do. This is improving my pipeline, and I'm tracking the performance of that pipeline, so I'll know if it's working. But Taylor, Kevin, any experience you've had in that realm? Or maybe it might be something to consider in the future.
One of the things we've done in our region, we developed a work-based learning faculty professional development because we needed our faculty to understand the importance of work-based learning and how it impacts students' career mobility. And one of the comments that was made in like the post surveys that has always gotten to me, it was an English professor, and no disrespect to English professors, but this professor said, until I took this training, I didn't understand that I was also helping prepare students for their careers, because English tends to be more of just like a lower division transfer requirement. And so I think, what we really need to do is figure out how we just change that perspective for all faculty. Is, every class, it doesn't matter what it is ultimately preparing students for their career and important to employers. And so that's kind of one of the things that we've realized through this as well.
Yeah, so it's sort of like the idea of culture and communication. The aha moment for a student can also be an aha moment for a teacher, a counselor, administrator, anyone when they get out into the community to experience a new perspective on the role that they play in helping building a strong community. And work-based learning is one of those, but there's also social impacts. It's great to have people volunteer in our community. You learn a completely different perspective when you're involved in service learning and when you're involved in helping in different ways support your community. Taylor, I'm going to ask one more question, then we're probably going to have to wrap it up. But when you think about the role of economic development in this whole process and the investment strategies that it's going to take to do all of this, oftentimes people shy away from, well, I'm going to pay someone with little skills, right? So what are your thoughts, and give a little perspective on what that first line of investment really is? It's not necessarily, in my opinion, not necessarily for, you're not paying for productivity, you're paying for much more than that and helping instill an employee or a potential employee for the long term.
Sure, you're paying for retention, right?
Yeah.
You're retain strong long-term workforce. And really here in San Diego with the challenges that we have that I outlined earlier, they don't really have a choice. Like our talent supply is getting low. And so we need to get creative about how we're bringing employees into the workforce, into these companies early on, and then supporting their education journey. We have, really important, companies that are pivotal to our national defense that exist here in San Diego. And for them, yeah, a bachelor's degree is a really important component, but they've learned and understand now how they can bring someone in early on, support the achievement of that bachelor's degree, the attainment of that bachelor's degree, whether it's financially through mentorship or just by letting someone adjust their hours a little bit to continue getting a degree. That person sticks around longer. They're dedicated to that company. They bring new ideas to the company. They can help innovate the way the company's doing things on what the classroom. And it really does open the door for folks who didn't, at 18 years old, didn't have the socioeconomic ability to go get a bachelor's degree. You're totally rethinking diversify the workforce in that sense.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think about it in our breakout session, we talked a little bit about how do you engage employers? Well, one way is to motivate the employee base, right? They're the parents of the children we're serving. So if you can motivate the employee base to become involved, that's going to do two things: create a positive culture for your company because your employees are more engaged. It's going to help support the schools because your students will be more actively involved in the community. Same way with this type of programming. If an employee serves as a mentor, that's an engagement tool. That's a motivational tool. They're helping to build capacity for the workforce that they've spent their whole career in, right? And so they want it to be successful. And I think there's just a lot of residual benefits from all of that. I have to tell you what, we are out of time. So Jason and Kevin and Taylor, thanks again. So much appreciate all that you've brought to our discussion.
So much.
Hope you stay involved. The CCD is going to continue to provide workshops. We're going to tap on your shoulder again. We're going to need more experience